Right now, somewhere in your house, there might be an animal lying on the floor. Maybe on a couch. Maybe on your bed. Maybe with its head resting on your foot. It trusts you completely. It would, in many cases, die for you without hesitation. And it is descended from one of the most efficient pack-hunting predators that has ever existed on this planet. Now imagine this, a wolf. Not a dog that looks like a wolf, an actual wolf. 40 to 80 pounds of muscle, built to run for miles, with a bite force strong enough to crack the femur of a moose. A wolf doesn't hunt alone. It hunts in coordinated packs, using strategy, communication, and patience that can outlast prey for days. For most of human history, wolves were not pets. They were one of the most dangerous animals you could encounter. And yet somehow, sometime in the last 15,000 to 40,000 years, that animal became this one, the one on your couch. And here's what nobody thinks to ask. How did that actually happen? The answer is stranger than humans tamed wolves, much stranger. And it might tell you something about how cooperation itself evolved. Let's start with the assumption almost everyone has. The story most people imagine goes something like this. Early humans found wolf puppies. They raised them by hand. Over generations, those wolves became tame, then became dogs. This sounds reasonable. It's also almost certainly wrong. Here's the problem. Hand-raising a wild wolf pup, even from birth, does not produce a dog. Researchers have tried this repeatedly. Wolves raised from infancy by humans, bottle-fed, socialized constantly, still grow into adult wolves. They remain wary. They remain unpredictable. They retain behaviors that no amount of human contact erases. So if early humans were grabbing wild wolf pups and raising them, the experiment should have failed every single time, which means something else was happening. In 2003, archaeologist and biologist Raymond Coppinger proposed an idea that flipped the entire narrative. He called it the Self-Domestication Hypothesis. Here's the core of it. Humans didn't seek out wolves. Wolves came to us. Around early human settlements, there was something new in the environment that had never existed before. Waste. Food scraps, bones, discarded remains from hunting and butchering. Garbage, essentially, but garbage that represented an enormous, reliable, low-effort food source. And wolves noticed. But here's the critical detail. Not all wolves could take advantage of this. A wild wolf's fear response to humans is extreme. The flight distance, how close a human can get before the animal bolts, is enormous in a normal wolf. But within any wolf population, there's natural variation. Some individuals have slightly lower fear responses, slightly higher tolerance for proximity to something unfamiliar and potentially dangerous. Those wolves, the ones just slightly less afraid, could approach human camps and access the waste piles. The more fearful wolves couldn't. They stayed away, and they didn't get the calories. This is where it gets interesting. Over generations, the wolves hanging around human settlements were, on average, the ones with lower fear responses. They bred with each other, and their offspring inherited that same slightly reduced fear. This is natural selection. Nobody was choosing anything. No human was selecting breeding pairs. The wolves were selecting themselves based on which ones could tolerate being near humans long enough to eat. Coppinger called this survival of the friendliest. Though friendliness wasn't the trait being selected, tameness was. And tameness, it turns out, comes with a strange package deal. In 1959, a Russian geneticist named Dmitry Belyaev started an experiment that would run for decades. He took silver foxes, wild, aggressive animals, and began breeding them based on exactly one criterion: tameness. Each generation, he selected the calmest individuals, the ones that didn't bite, didn't flee, tolerated human presence, and bred them together. Nothing else. Not appearance, not size, just tameness. Within just a few generations, something unexpected started happening. The fox's ears began to droop. Their tails started to curl. Patches of white fur appeared on their coats. Their skulls became slightly shorter and rounder. Some developed shorter legs. None of this was selected for. Belyaev had only been breeding for behavior, but tameness, it turns out, is connected at a deep genetic level to a whole cluster of physical traits. Researchers now call this domestication syndrome, and it shows up in some form across nearly every domesticated species on Earth. Floppy ears in dogs, pigs, and rabbits. Curly tails in dogs and pigs. Patches of white or piebald coloring in cows, horses, and dogs. Smaller brains relative to body size. More juvenile facial features retained into adulthood. The leading explanation involves something called neural crest cells, a type of cell in developing embryos that influences both the nervous system, including the stress response, and physical features like ear cartilage, tail structure, and pigmentation. Select for calm behavior, and you're accidentally selecting for a whole developmental package. The wolves that hung around human camps weren't just becoming less afraid, they were becoming, in a very real biological sense, something new. But there's a layer to this that goes deeper than fear and physical traits, because somewhere in this process, something happened that had never happened before between two species. A bond formed. In 2015, a team of Japanese researchers led by Miho Nagasawa ran an experiment that tested something nobody had really measured before. What happens biologically when a dog and a human look into each other's eyes? They measured oxytocin levels, the hormone associated with bonding, trust, and attachment, the same hormone released between mothers and infants, in both dogs and their owners, before and after periods of mutual gazing. The results were remarkable. When dogs and owners looked into each other's eyes, oxytocin levels rose in both species, not just the human, both. They then tested wolves raised by humans, even hand-raised from puppies in the same setup. Nothing happened. No oxytocin spike, no mutual gaze bonding loop. The wolves, despite being raised by humans, didn't have whatever this was. Dogs had developed, or maybe activated, a biological bonding mechanism that mirrors the one between human parents and infants. A mechanism that doesn't exist in their wild ancestor. This wasn't trained, it wasn't taught, it emerged. And then there's the pointing. This sounds like a small thing. It isn't. If you point at an object, a dog will look at the object. This seems obvious. It is not obvious at all. In 2002, comparative psychologist Brian Hare ran a series of experiments comparing dogs, wolves, and chimpanzees on their ability to follow human pointing gestures. Chimpanzees, our closest living relatives who share roughly 98% of our DNA, largely failed. Wolves, even those raised closely with humans from birth, also failed or performed dramatically worse than dogs. Dogs, including young puppies with minimal human exposure, succeeded immediately. This means dogs have an innate capacity to read human communicative gestures that our closest primate relatives do not have. Hare's conclusion was striking. Dogs didn't just become less aggressive toward humans, they evolved a kind of social intelligence specifically calibrated to understand us. Not generalized intelligence, not problem-solving ability. Wolves often outperform dogs on raw problem-solving tasks. Specifically, an ability to read human intention. Somewhere in the process of self-domestication, an animal evolved the cognitive equivalent of learning our language before we had one to teach. So when did this become something more than wolves loitering near garbage piles? The archaeological evidence for the moment this relationship became something else, something emotional, something mutual, is almost unbearably specific. At a site called Bonn Oberkassel in Germany, archaeologists found a grave roughly 14,000 years old. Inside, the remains of two humans, and beside them, a dog. Analysis of the dog's teeth showed it had survived a severe illness, likely canine distemper, for weeks, possibly months before dying. A wild wolf with that illness would not have survived. It couldn't hunt. It couldn't keep up with a pack. It would have been abandoned or left behind. This animal didn't die in the wild. Someone took care of it. Someone kept it alive through a debilitating illness it had no chance of surviving on its own. And when it died, someone buried it. Not discarded it, buried it, next to humans, as if it belonged there. This is, as far as we know, one of the earliest pieces of evidence for an animal being cared for not because it served a function, but because someone wanted it to live. Here is where it connects to you. The animal on your floor right now carries the genetic legacy of every single step in this process. The slightly braver wolves who approached the first camps. The generations of selection, not by humans, but by circumstance, that favored calm over aggression. The accidental cascade of domestication syndrome that gave dogs their floppy ears and curled tails and round puppy eyes that never fully disappear even in adulthood. The bonding loop that doesn't exist in their wild ancestors. The oxytocin response that mirrors the one between a parent and child. The ability, present from puppyhood, to read your gestures, your face, your intentions. An ability our closest genetic relatives don't share. And somewhere, 14,000 years ago, the moment this stopped being about survival and started being about something else entirely. story. Someone in the middle of the last ice age kept a dying animal alive, not because it could hunt, not because it could guard, because they didn't want it to die. And when you look at the animal on your floor, the one that runs to the door when you come home, that rests its head on you for no reason, that looks into your eyes and triggers the same hormone your own infant would, you're looking at the end result of an evolutionary accident that turned one of the most dangerous predators on Earth into something that loves you, not because we designed it, because somewhere along the way, on both sides, something decided to trust, and it worked.